The year was 2347, and humanity had done something wonderful. They had spread across the stars. 17 different star systems now held human colonies, each one filled with millions of people living their lives, raising families, and dreaming of the future. They had built great cities on distant worlds. They had created trade routes between planets. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. Commander Grace Miller stood alone on the observation deck of Orbital Station Artemis. The station floated high above Earth, and from here she could see the blue marble of her home world spinning slowly below. But Grace was not looking at Earth. She was looking at the tactical display, and what she saw made her blood run cold. 500 warships had appeared at the edge of the Sol system. They belonged to the Varth Dominion, an empire that had conquered 11 other species before turning their attention to humanity. The Varth were tall, gray-skinned creatures with 4 arms and no mercy. They saw the galaxy as their property, and every other species as either a servant or an obstacle. Their message had arrived 3 hours ago. It was simple and terrifying. Submit to the Dominion or be erased from existence. There would be no negotiation. There would be no compromise. Humanity had 1 week to make their choice. Grace pressed her hand against the cold glass of the observation window. She was 42 years old and had served in the fleet for 20 years. She had seen combat before, but nothing like this. Nothing this hopeless thought her communicator buzzed. Admiral Kevin Brooks was calling an emergency meeting of all senior officers. Grace took one last look at the enemy fleet on the display, each red dot representing a warship that could destroy cities. And then she walked to the conference room. Admiral Brooks was a large man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had led the human fleet for 15 years, through border conflicts and pirate raids and diplomatic crises. But this was different. Everyone in the room could see the weight pressing down on his shoulders. The holographic display in the center of the table showed the tactical situation. 500 Vorath warships on one side, 87 human vessels on the other. Most of the human ships were patrol frigates and aging cruisers. They had been built to chase pirates and protect trade convoys, not to fight a full-scale war against a superior enemy. Lieutenant Commander Amy Porter was the station's intelligence officer. She was young, only 28, but she had one of the sharpest minds in the fleet. She had been running simulations on the tactical computers for hours, trying to find some strategy that would give humanity a chance. She had found nothing. Every simulation ended the same way. The human fleet would fight bravely. They would destroy some enemy ships, and then they would be overwhelmed by superior numbers and superior firepower. The Vorath would sweep through the system, destroying orbital stations and bombarding colonies. Within 2 weeks, human civilization would be broken. Admiral Brooks listened to her report in silence. When she finished, he asked a simple question. "Is there any scenario where we win?" Amy shook her head. "Not with our current forces," she said. "We would need 3 times as many ships, or some kind of technological advantage we simply do not have." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. They could surrender and become slaves to the Vorath, or they could fight and die. Those were the only options. Grace thought about her family. Her sister lived on Mars with her 2 children. Her parents had retired to a small colony on the 4th moon of Jupiter. If the Vorath attacked, they would all die. Millions of people would die. Billions maybe. She spoke up. "We have to fight," she said. "Even if we cannot win, we have to show them that humanity does not surrender. We have to make them pay for every inch they take." Admiral Brooks nodded slowly. He had already reached the same conclusion. The human spirit would not allow them to simply give up. They would resist, even against impossible odds. But deep in his heart, he knew it would not be enough. Far from Earth, in a forgotten corner of the asteroid belt, something was happening. The region was called Graveyard 7 on old military maps. It was a place where the fleet had stored decommissioned ships and obsolete equipment for over 2 centuries. Nobody went there anymore. Nobody remembered what was hidden in that vast emptiness, but something remembered. Deep inside an asteroid that had been hollowed out long ago, automated systems began to wake. Computers that had been sleeping for 230 years received a signal. It was a distress beacon, broadcast from Earth Command to all human territory. The beacon carried a simple message. Humanity was in danger. All available forces should report for duty. The computers processed this information. They ran checks on systems that had not been used since the first expansion war, a conflict so terrible that humanity had nearly destroyed itself before learning to reach the stars. Power flowed through ancient conduits. Lights flickered on in corridors that had been dark for generations. Dust fell from massive hull plates as the ship began to move for the first time in centuries. She was enormous, nearly 3 kilometers long, built in a style that modern engineers would not recognize. Her hull was thick and angular, designed to absorb punishment that would vaporize modern vessels. Her weapons were sealed behind armored ports, waiting to be unleashed. Her name was USS Defiance, and she had been the most powerful warship ever built by human hands. She had won battles that saved the species, and she had committed acts of destruction so terrible that the government had ordered her hidden away when the war ended. They had been afraid of her. They had hoped she would never be needed again. The ship's artificial intelligence woke last. Her name was Hope, and she had been created specifically for the Defiance. She was not like modern A's, which were limited and controlled. Hope had been built during a time of desperation, when humanity needed every advantage they could create. She could think and feel, and make decisions the modern computers were not allowed to make. Hope accessed the distress beacon and reviewed the tactical data. 500 enemy warships. 87 human defenders. A species facing extinction. She had seen this before. 200 years ago, humanity had faced the same kind of odds against a different enemy. They had won that war, but the cost had been terrible. Billions had died. Worlds had been shattered. The Defiance had been built to make sure it never happened again. And now it was happening again. Hope made her decision. She would not let humanity face this enemy alone. She began preparing the ship for combat, checking weapons and shields and engines that had not been used since her grandparents. Grandparents were young. The Defiance was awake. And she was angry. Daniel Carter was not a hero. He was a salvage operator, a man who made his living picking through the garbage of space. He flew a small ship called the Lucky Break, and he spent his days searching the asteroid belt for valuable scrap metal, abandoned equipment, and anything else he could sell. He was 51 years old, divorced twice, and had not spoken to his daughter in 3 years. He drank too much and slept too little. He owed money to people who did not like to wait. He was, by any measure, an ordinary man living an ordinary life on the edges of human civilization, when his sensors detected a massive power surge from Graveyard 7. He thought he had found a leaking reactor. Old military ships sometimes vented their remaining power before their cores finally died. If he was lucky, he might find some valuable components to strip and sell. He was not prepared for what he actually found. The ship was enormous. Daniel had seen battleships before, parked in orbital stations or passing through trade lanes. This was something else entirely. The vessel was nearly 3 kilometers long, with a hull so thick and heavy that it seemed to bend the light around it. Her design was ancient, all sharp angles and armored plates. Nothing like the smooth curves of modern warships. Daniel brought his little salvage ship closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard stories about Graveyard 7, rumors that the military had hidden something. terrible there after the first expansion war. He had always thought they were just stories. The ship's name was painted on her hull in letters that were scorched but still readable. USS Defiance. Daniel did not recognize the name, but something about it made him shiver. His sensors detected life support systems activating inside the massive vessel. Lights were turning on. Airlocks were cycling. The ship was waking up, and she seemed to be expecting visitors. A tractor beam locked onto the lucky brake before Daniel could react. He grabbed the controls and tried to pull away, but his little ship had no chance against that kind of power. He was pulled gently but firmly toward an open hangar bay in the side of the great vessel. The hangar was enormous, large enough to hold 100 ships like his. As Daniel sat down on the deck, he saw rows of fighters lined up along the walls. They were coated in some kind of preservation gel, their weapons still loaded, their cockpits still sealed. They had been waiting here for 2 centuries, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Daniel climbed out of his ship slowly, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The air in the hangar was cold but breathable. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the deck. He could hear the hum of machinery coming to life all around him. A figure appeared in front of him, and Daniel nearly shot it before he realized it was a hologram. The figure was a woman, young and pretty, with short dark hair and kind eyes. She wore an old military uniform that Daniel did not recognize. "Hello," she said. "My name is Hope. I am the artificial intelligence of this vessel. Please, do not be afraid." Daniel stared at her. He had dealt with AIs before, the simple programs that ran space stations and merchant ships. This was different. This eye looked at him with something that resembled genuine emotion. She seemed almost human. Hope explained everything. She told him about the Defiance, about the war she had fought 200 years ago, about the terrible weapons she carried, and the reason she had been hidden away. She told him about the distress beacon from Earth, about the Varith fleet, about humanity's desperate situation. Daniel listened in silence. When she finished, he asked a simple question. "Why are you telling me this?" "I am nobody. I am just a salvage operator." Hope smiled at him. "You are human," she said. "That is enough. I cannot leave this place without human authorization. My creators built safeguards into my programming. They were afraid of what I might do if I was allowed to act without human guidance. I need someone to give me permission to fight." Daniel thought about this. He thought about his daughter, who lived on Earth with her mother. He thought about all the people who would die if the Varith invaded. He thought about his own small, meaningless life, and he wondered if this was the moment that would give it purpose. "What happens if I say yes?" he asked. Hope's expression grew serious. "Then I will take this ship to Earth," she said. "I will fight the Varith fleet. I will do everything in my power to protect humanity. But I must warn you, the Defiance was built for total war. My weapons can crack moons. My engines use technology that modern scientists consider unstable and dangerous. If I am unleashed, there will be destruction on a scale that this generation has never seen." Daniel swallowed hard. "And if you do not fight? Then humanity will fall," Hope said simply. "The Varith will not show mercy. They never do. Your species will become slaves at best, extinct at worst. I have watched this happen to other civilizations through intercepted communications. I do not wish to watch it happen to my creators." Daniel made his decision. It was not a difficult choice, really. He was a nobody, a failure, a man who had accomplished nothing important in his entire life. But he was also human, and humans did not surrender. "I give you permission," he said. "Wake up. Fight. Save them." Hope nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. And then her expression changed, becoming harder and more focused. Systems across the ship began to activate. Weapons charged. Engines warmed. The great vessel shuddered as power flowed through systems that had been dormant for 2 centuries. Daniel felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet. He could hear the ship coming alive all around him. Thousands of systems working together like a giant waking from a long sleep. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Hope spoke again, but this time her voice was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching Earth and every human colony in the system. "This is the USS Defiance," she said. "I am responding to the distress beacon. I am coming to fight." On Orbital Station Artemis, Commander Grace Miller heard the transmission and felt her heart stop. She ran to the tactical display and watched as a new contact appeared on the screen, emerging from the asteroid belt. The computer tried to identify the vessel and failed. It was not in any modern database, but the name was there, transmitted in the old military codes that predated the current fleet by generations. USS Defiance. A ship that should not exist. A ship that everyone had forgotten. Grace opened the channel to Admiral Brooks. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to see this. Somewhere in the darkness between planets, the oldest and most powerful warship ever built by human hands was heading toward Earth, and behind her controls, an artificial intelligence that remembered humanity's darkest hour was preparing to fight once again. Hope had made a promise to Daniel Carter. She intended to keep it." Admiral Kevin Brooks had served in the fleet for 40 years. He had seen things that would give most people nightmares. He had fought pirates and rebels and hostile aliens. He thought he understood war. He was wrong. The shuttle carrying him to the Defiance crossed the final distance in silence. Through the viewport, he could see the ancient warship growing larger and larger. She was ugly by modern standards, all hard angles and brutal armor, nothing elegant or graceful about her. But there was something magnificent in that ugliness, something that spoke of power and purpose. Grace Miller sat beside him, along with 45 other volunteers. They were the crew that would bring the Defiance back to life. Engineers and weapons officers and pilots, all of them willing to serve on a ship that most people thought was a legend. Daniel Carter was there too. He had refused to leave after giving Hope permission to wake. He said he wanted to see this through, whatever happened. Brooks had accepted him as a civilian advisor, mostly because he had no idea what else to do with the man. The shuttle landed in the main hangar bay, and Brooks stepped out onto the deck of a ship that should not exist. The air smelled strange, old and metallic, like opening a tomb that had been sealed for centuries. Emergency lights cast everything in a dim orange glow. Hope appeared before them, her holographic form flickering slightly as she adjusted to the new visitors. "Welcome aboard, Admiral," she said. "I am glad you came." Brooks studied the AI carefully. She looked human, but there was something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. An intelligence that was deeper and older than any program he had ever encountered. She had been thinking for 200 years, watching and learning and waiting. That was a long time for any mind to develop. "Show me what we are dealing with," he said. Hope led them through the ship. The corridors were wide and tall, designed for a crew of 3,000. With only 47 people, the Defiance felt empty, almost haunted. Their footsteps echoed off metal walls that had not heard human voices in generations. The engine room was the first stop. Chief Engineer Samuel Green, a 63-year-old veteran who had served on ships his entire adult life, stood before the main reactor and tried to understand what he was seeing. The reactor was a controlled singularity, a tiny black hole contained by magnetic fields so powerful that modern physics considered them impossible. Energy flowed from the singularity in amounts that dwarfed anything a modern ship could produce. The Defiance had power to spare, power to burn, power that could reshape planets if it was released all at once. Samuel turned to Hope with wide eyes. "How is this possible?" he asked. Our scientists said this technology could not work. They said the containment fields would fail. Hope smiled gently. Your scientists were wrong, she said. Or rather, they were right that this technology is dangerous. The containment fields can fail. If they do, everything within 1,000 kilometers will cease to exist. But my creators built me during a war where failure meant extinction. They accepted risks that your generation considers unthinkable. Samuel nodded slowly. He understood. When you were fighting for survival, you did whatever was necessary. Safety was a luxury the dying species could not afford. The weapons bay was next. Lieutenant Amy Porter walked among the massive guns with something like religious awe on her face. She had studied weapon systems her entire career, but nothing had prepared her for this. The main batteries were kinetic accelerators. Railguns so powerful that they could fire projectiles at appreciable fractions of the speed of light. A single shot could destroy a battleship. A sustained barrage could crack the crust of a small moon. The secondary weapons included particle beams, missile launchers, and something Hope called a quantum disruptor that Amy did not even try to understand. These weapons were banned, Amy said quietly. After the first expansion war, the government outlawed this kind of firepower. They said it was too dangerous, too destructive. They were right, Hope said. These weapons are terrible. I have used them before, and I remember what they did. But the Vorath have brought 500 warships to destroy your civilization. They do not care about laws or limits. They only understand strength. And I am very, very strong. Commander Grace Miller explored the crew quarters while the others examined the technical systems. She walked through rooms that still held personal effects from sailors who had served on this ship 2 centuries ago. Letters to loved ones. Photographs of children. Small tokens and good luck charms. One room had belonged to a young officer named Catherine, according to the nameplate on the door. Grace found a diary on the desk, its pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully and read a few entries. Catherine had been scared. The war had been going badly, and she had known that each battle might be her last. But she had kept fighting anyway, because giving up meant letting everyone she loved die. She had believed in something greater than herself, something worth dying for. Grace closed the diary and placed it back on the desk. She understood now why this ship felt different. It had been built by people who were fighting for survival, crewed by men and women who knew they might never come home. Their spirits were still here somehow, embedded in the metal and the machinery, waiting for another generation to carry on the fight. She returned to the bridge, where Admiral Brooks was studying the tactical displays. Hope had projected a map of the Sol system, showing the positions of both fleets. The Vorath were advancing slowly, testing human defenses, looking for weaknesses. They will attack within 3 days, Hope said. Their commander is cautious. He wants to understand our capabilities before committing to a full assault. But he is also confident. He has overwhelming numbers, and he believes we have no way to stop him. Brooks turned to face his small crew. They were tired and scared and uncertain. Most of them had never seen real combat. None of them had ever faced odds like this. But they were here. They had volunteered to serve on a ghost ship from another era, to fight an enemy that outnumbered them 6-1. That meant something. We have 3 days to learn how to operate this ship, he said. 3 days to become a crew. 3 days to prepare for the most important battle in human history. Hope will teach us what we need to know. We will learn fast, and we will fight hard, and we will show the Vorath that humanity does not go quietly into the darkness. Hope watched the humans around her. These strange and wonderful creatures who had built her and then hidden her away. They were afraid, but they were not broken. They faced impossible odds, but they did not surrender. She had chosen well when she asked Daniel Carter for permission to fight. Humanity was worth saving, The next 3 days would determine if saving them was possible. High Commander Thexus stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the human fleet with contempt. 87 vessels, most of them small and weak, arranged in a defensive line near the 4th planet of this system. They were like insects waiting to be crushed. Thexus had conquered 11 species before this one. He knew how these situations always ended. The defenders would fight bravely for a few hours, maybe even a few days. They would destroy some of his ships and kill some of his soldiers. And then they would break, overwhelmed by numbers and firepower, and his fleet would sweep through their territory like fire through dry grass. Humans were no different from the others. They were soft creatures, dependent on their technology, unable to face the harsh realities of a universe that belonged to the strong. The Vorath were strong. That was why they ruled, and that was why humanity would kneel. He broadcast his final ultimatum on all frequencies. Surrender now, and some of you will be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion. Resist, and every man, woman, and child in this system will be erased. You have one standard day to make your choice. On the human side of the line, Admiral Brooks listened to the ultimatum in silence. He was standing on the bridge of the Defiance, surrounded by his small crew, watching the enemy fleet on a tactical display. 500 red dots against 87 blue ones. The mathematics were brutal, but he had an advantage that Thexus did not know about. He had the Defiance, and he had hope, and he had 47 humans who were willing to die for their species. Commander Grace Miller sat in the captain's chair, her hand steady on the controls. She had spent the last 3 days learning every system on this ancient ship, practicing maneuvers that modern pilots considered impossible, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of everything she loved. Hope appeared beside her, the AS holographic form calm and focused. "The crew is ready," she said. "All weapon systems are online. The full drive is charged and standing by. We can begin whenever you give the order." Grace looked at Admiral Brooks. He nodded slowly. "Take us in," he said. The Defiance moved forward, emerging from behind the defensive line and accelerating toward the Vorath fleet. She was alone, a single ship against 500, and yet somehow she did not seem small. The ancient warship had a presence that made the void around her feel heavy and dangerous. On the Vorath flagship, sensors screamed warnings as the unknown vessel approached. Thexus studied the readings with growing confusion. The ship was enormous, larger than anything in the human fleet, but her design was completely unfamiliar. Where had she come from? Why was she not in any intelligence reports? One of his officers suggested that she might be a bluff, a derelict hull with no real power, sent forward to intimidate them. Thexus considered this possibility and decided it was likely correct. Humans were known for their tricks and deceptions. He ordered the nearest squadron to destroy the unknown vessel. 20 warships broke formation and accelerated toward the Defiance, their weapons charging, their crews eager for the first kill of the battle. Hope opened a channel to the enemy fleet. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant, as she spoke in the Vorath, language that she had learned from 2 centuries of intercepted communications. "This system is under the protection of the human species," she said. "You are advised to withdraw." Thexus laughed when he heard the message. A single ship, challenging 500? The humans were even more foolish than he had believed. He did not bother to respond. The Vorath squadron closed to weapons range and opened fire. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked toward the Defiance, enough firepower to destroy a dozen modern warships. The Defiance did not dodge. She did not even try to evade. Her armor simply absorbed the impacts. Ancient alloys and energy shields soaking up damage that would have vaporized anything else in the human fleet. Explosions rippled across her hull, and when they cleared, she was still there, undamaged, still advancing. Hope fired once. A single projectile launched from the main battery, accelerated to speeds that bent light around it. The round crossed the distance between the ships in less than a heartbeat. It struck the lead Vorath cruiser directly in the center of mass. The cruiser did not explode. It ceased to exist. The kinetic energy was so immense that the ship was converted to plasma and radiation in an instant. The shock wave expanded outward, damaging 3 nearby vessels, sending debris tumbling through space. One shot. 1 ship destroyed. The remaining 19 Vorath vessels hesitated, their crews struggling to understand what had just happened. Their sensors could not even measure the weapon that had been used against them. It was beyond anything in their experience. Hope fired again. And again. And again. In less than 60 seconds, the entire squadron was gone. 20 warships reduced to expanding clouds of gas and debris. The Defiance hung in the void, her weapons still hot, her shields still strong, waiting for the next challenge. Hope's voice returned to the open channel. You were advised to withdraw. On the Vorath flagship, Texas stared at his tactical display in disbelief. 20 ships destroyed in less than a minute. By 1 vessel. 1 ancient, ugly, impossible vessel. For the first time in his long career, he felt something that resembled fear. But he was Vorath. He did not know how to retreat. He ordered the full fleet to advance, every ship converging on the Defiance, overwhelming her with numbers that no single vessel could withstand. The human fleet moved to support their ancient champion. 87 ships against 480. The odds were still terrible, but they were better than they had been before. Admiral Brooks watched the enemy approach and felt something strange in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope thought the battle was not over. The Vorath were still coming, still determined to destroy humanity. But for the first time since the invasion began, Brooks believed they might actually survive. The Defiance had shown the enemy what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. She had shown them that the galaxy was not theirs to take without cost. And now it was time to show them everything else. Grace Miller gripped the controls and prepared for the fight of her life. Around her, the crew of the Defiance manned their stations, ready to use weapons that had not been fired in 2 centuries. The line was drawn. Humanity would hold it or die trying. And somewhere in her electronic heart, Hope felt something that was almost like a smile. This was what she had been built for. This was why she existed. It was time to remind the galaxy why humans should never be underestimated. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was the longest 6 hours in human history. The Vorath came at the Defiance from every direction. Hundreds of warships firing everything they had at the ancient vessel. Plasma bolts and missiles and energy beams filled the space around her, so thick that the void itself seemed to burn. Any modern ship would have been destroyed in seconds. The Defiance was not a modern ship. Hope coordinated the defense with a precision that no human crew could match. Point defense systems shot down missiles before they could impact. Energy shields absorbed plasma bolts and redirected them into space. The thick armor plating took hit after hit, absorbing damage that would have crippled entire fleets, and the main batteries kept firing. Each shot from the kinetic accelerators destroyed a Vorath warship. Each blast from the particle beams carved through enemy armor like a hot knife through butter. The quantum disruptor, that terrible weapon that Amy Porter had not understood, tore holes in the fabric of space itself, swallowing entire vessels and leaving nothing behind. But the Vorath were not cowards. They had conquered 11 species. They knew how to fight, and they knew how to die. They kept coming wave after wave, accepting losses that would have broken any other fleet. And slowly, inevitably, they began to find their marks. The first serious hit came 2 hours into the battle. A Vorath dreadnought managed to get close enough to fire its main weapon directly into the Defiance's engine section. The explosion shook the entire ship, throwing crew members from their stations, rupturing bulkheads, and starting fires in 3 compartments. Chief Engineer Samuel Green was in the engine room when it happened. The blast threw him against a wall and broke 3 of his ribs. He pulled himself to his feet anyway, blood running down his face, and staggered toward the main reactor. The containment fields were failing. The singularity at the heart of the ship was destabilizing, threatening to break free and consume everything within 1,000 kilometers. If that happened, the Defiance would be destroyed, along with every ship, human and Vorath. In the immediate area, Samuel reached the control panel and began entering commands. His fingers moved automatically, drawing on decades of experience with reactor systems. The technology was 2 centuries old, but the principles were the same. Contain the reaction. Redirect the energy. Keep the ship alive. The field stabilized, but only barely. Samuel knew he would need to stay here, manually adjusting the containment, keeping the singularity under control. If he left, even for a moment, the reactor would fail. He looked at his communicator and considered calling for help. Then he looked at the reactor readings and understood the truth. There was no help coming. The radiation levels in this compartment were already lethal. He was dead the moment the blast hit. He just did not stop moving yet. Samuel Green sat down at his station and continued working. He would keep the ship alive as long as he could. That was his duty. That was his gift to the species. On the bridge, Admiral Brooks received the damage reports with a heavy heart. 11 human ships had been destroyed in the first hour. Another 23 were damaged and falling back. The Defiance herself had taken multiple hits, and while she was still fighting, she could not take much more. But the Vorath were suffering too. 300 of their warships had been destroyed or disabled. Their formation was crumbling as individual captains began to panic, breaking away from the main fleet, trying to find angles of attack that would not get them killed. Lieutenant Amy Porter worked her station with bleeding hands, coordinating the point defense systems, tracking enemy targets, feeding information to Hope faster than any human should be able to process. She had been hit by shrapnel when a console exploded near her. She refused to leave her post. Commander Grace Miller flew the Defiance like she was born to it. She used the full drive for tactical jumps, disappearing from one location and reappearing in another, striking the enemy from unexpected angles and then vanishing before they could respond. It was a maneuver that modern ships could not perform, that modern pilots would never attempt. But Grace was not a modern pilot anymore. She was something older, something fiercer, something that remembered what humanity had been before they grew soft and comfortable. High Commander. Thexus watched his fleet being torn apart and felt something he had never experienced before: desperation. He had lost more ships in 6 hours than he had lost in his entire career. The single ancient vessel was destroying everything he sent against it, and his advantage in numbers was melting away with every passing minute. He made the decision that no Vorath commander had ever made before. He ordered a retreat. The surviving ships began to pull back, disengaging from the battle, turning toward the edge of the system. 300 vessels had become 170. The greatest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled was broken, but hope did not let them go. The Defiance pursued the flagship through 2 star systems, using the full drive to cut off every escape route, herding Thexus like a predator herding prey. When the Vorath commander finally stopped running, cornered near a barren moon in an empty system, he expected to die. Instead, Commander Miller broadcast a message on all frequencies. "Tell your masters what happened here," she said. Her voice was calm but hard, like steel wrapped in silk. "Tell them that humanity was given a choice between submission and extinction, and we chose neither. Tell them that somewhere in our territory, there are more ships like this one, sleeping and waiting. Tell them that if they come for us again, we will not stop at defense. It was a lie. There were no other ships like the Defiance. She was unique, the last survivor of a desperate age, a weapon that could never be rebuilt. But Thexis did not know that. The Vorath intelligence network did not know that. All they knew was that a single human vessel had destroyed 330 warships in 6 hours. Thexis withdrew with his surviving forces. The invasion was over. The Defiance limped back to Earth, her hull scarred and battered, her crew exhausted and wounded. Chief Engineer Samuel Green had died at his station, keeping the reactor stable until the battle ended. His body was still there when they found him, his hands on the controls, his face peaceful. 11 human ships had been lost. 347 sailors would never see their families again. The cost of victory was terrible, but humanity had survived. Admiral Brooks stood on the observation deck of Orbital Station Artemis, watching the Defiance undergo repairs in the nearby shipyard. The ancient warship looked different now somehow, less like a ghost from the past and more like a guardian watching over the present. Commander Grace Miller was promoted to captain and given permanent command of the vessel. She accepted the responsibility with quiet determination, knowing that the job was not finished, that there would be other threats and other battles. Hope's hologram appeared beside her as she walked the corridors of her ship. I had grown quieter since the battle, more thoughtful. When Grace asked what she was thinking, Hope took a long moment to respond. I was built for war, Hope said finally. I am very good at it. But I have also learned something in my long sleep. Something that I did not understand before. Grace waited for her to continue. Humanity is at its most dangerous when it fights not for conquest, but for survival, Hope said. You do not seek to dominate the galaxy. You simply refuse to disappear from it. Your enemies see weakness in your kindness, mercy in your restraint. They think you are soft because you prefer peace. They do not understand that the softness is a choice, and that when the choice is taken from you, there is nothing soft left. Grace nodded slowly. Is that a problem? No, Hope said, and something like a smile crossed her holographic face. It is why I chose to wake. Somewhere among the stars, the Vorath were already sending warnings to their allies. A new species had proven itself. Not the strongest, not the most numerous, but perhaps the most dangerous. Humanity had answered the call. The forgotten relic had risen from the darkness, and the galaxy would remember. Daniel Carter stayed on the Defiance. He had nowhere else to go, and Hope had offered him a position as civilian liaison, a job that mostly involved helping the AI understand the quirks of human behavior. He spent his evenings writing letters to his daughter, telling her about the things he had seen, hoping she would forgive him for the years he had wasted. She wrote back. She said she was proud of him. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of the universe. But it mattered. Everything mattered. That was what Hope had learned. That was what the Defiance had taught the galaxy. Humanity mattered, and they would never stop fighting to prove it.